Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Tashi Wada, a composer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Tashi has a new album out now, What Is Not Strange, on Revenge International, which features, among others, his partner and longtime collaborator Julia Holter and percussionist Corey Fogle. And Tashi utilizes an adjusted mean tone tuning system on this album. It's a beautiful effect. You really feel it rippling through the body of this album. And Tashi has likened this music to dream states, and again, that's something that you really pick up on listening to this album. You have these melodies that come in and they're incredibly vivid, and then, as we discuss in this conversation, you have this unspooling as if consciousness is softening. The melodic shapes start to kind of unravel, and you end up in these passages of refracted time, occasionally snapping back to a more shapely state and kind of wondering where you've been for the past 5 minutes. It does something really interesting, I think, to your listening memory, this album. And Tashi was great company in this conversation. He is, as I'm gathering, like a voracious music listener, and picked 3 artists that have all actually been featured on Crucial Listening previously, but picked records by these artists which were absolute gems, stuff I'd never heard before. And he talks about sound and listening in a really thoughtful way. I love his new album, so it was great to get some insight into that in the first portion of the discussion. And the whole thing was a real treat. If you're enjoying Crucial Listening, you can support it over at ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can pay one-off or monthly, any amount you please, to help keep the podcast ticking. Okay, I think that's it for now. In terms of pre-waffle, enjoy this. This is Tashi Wada on Crucial Listening. Hello, Tashi. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
No trouble. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We're here to talk about your 3 important albums. Before we get to those, I want to talk about your new album, What Is Not Strange, on Revenge International. So I saw a nice post on Instagram from Julia Holter, who mentioned that she'd never seen you practice keyboard in the manner you did in the lead up to this album, doing scales and runs in mean tone tunings over and over again. So that was very interesting to read about. I wanted to hear a bit from you as to what preparing for this album looked like, and why potentially it ended up being perhaps more full on than maybe previous projects have been.
Yeah, I guess I did prepare and practice a lot in anticipation of recording and on keyboard. I studied piano as a child, and so I have a kind of a long-standing, maybe complicated relationship with playing keyboard. I love it, but when you grow up playing, there's some kind of baggage sometimes that stays on, and from piano lessons and these things. So, but I've in recent years, I've really enjoyed playing keyboard. I hadn't been playing as much for a while when I was like in my 20s, and so yeah, it was really enjoyable to dig into it and have all of that stuff that's like in my hands and sort of that feeling come back out in a certain way. So yeah, and I think the combination of that and working with different tuning systems, it's important for me to get it in my hands and the feeling of it and the shape of my hands on the keyboard. And I guess for me just it requires repetition and familiarity, and sort of to the point where it becomes almost like something you're not thinking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like a big part of the process. Also, I was working on this album for the past few years, and with the pandemic, and I had, and things like this, I had more time on my hands. So maybe that was my project, was to dig back into that. And now it just feels great. Like, and we've been getting ready to play shows, and it's like all there in my hands, which is so nice. I feel very good about playing the music live, and so in like recording the keyboard parts are really in my album are really the sort of like the through line for the album, so that what kind of holds it all together, and then with like specific players in mind, people I've worked with a lot in the past, and people who are friends but I've worked with less, and so yeah, I'm big on like playing. I think that's like very enjoyable to me these days, like the physical act of playing, and not just doing everything in the box. And I like that. It's where my roots are, is performing. Yeah,
it sounds like you've been on a real trajectory with that, the baggage of piano playing, which I think that's why it's fascinating to hear that you were diving back into scales, because I can imagine if there's any baggage to be had from piano lessons, it's fucking scales, surely. So it sounds like that maybe that's a proof of the fact that you've conquered the initial aversion to diving back into doing the keyboard again. But I mean, what changed? You mentioned the pandemic giving you more time to devote to the keyboard, but how did it come about that you even wanted to reintroduce yourself to making the keyboard front and center again?
Well, I think it's something that I had wanted to do for a long time, and was like starting to happen before, but it was just a matter of right time and place, and sometimes you're just waiting, you don't know for what. I, having studied classical music, and some people, they go completely in the opposite direction, or I feel like for me, I feel like I have like a good relationship with that, and I feel like I can appreciate what it has given me, and I can take what I want from it. Like, there's a certain kind of translation of a way of hearing harmony, and just certain aspects that are specific to that music that I feel like are useful for me, and I I wouldn't say it's like a reckoning. It's just like it feels like it feels natural. And it's there whether you want it or not. All your musical past.
It's true. So from the outside, at least, there's another means by which this album kind of demonstrates what feels like a shift, which is the centering of song-based structures They're very prominent on this record, and that really kicks up some gorgeous melodies. Like on the the single and the video you put out, I was going to ask you the pronunciation. Is it Grand Trine?
Yes.
Cool.
Exactly.
Grand Trine, which is gorgeous. Again, I'm curious to know what led you to feel the pull towards more song-based form on this record.
I would say in both of these cases, with putting the keyboard playing kind of front and center, and then the song forms and structures. And I'd say in both of these cases, it wasn't something I was intentionally thinking about doing. It sort of developed that way. But I think one aspect of this album and the previous album I made with my dad, Nue, I'd say like in both cases these were made very much in the studio. I mean the album with my dad came out of us performing together for many years, but this album, none of this music was actually, except for a few parts of it, were really came out of performing initially. They were sort of developed on my own and in recording, and so the actual music was made through that process, which is very different to me than music that comes out of playing live, in that it's like, I think for me at least, there's like a tendency to kind of create this sort of condensed, idealized form in recording. That's sort of what I feel like recording has going for it. You can fine tune things, and it can be played back infinitely. And so like with live like performing, I feel like there's a tendency to kind of prolong the experience, and then for me with recording there's a tendency to kind of condense the experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think in that, like, over time it sort of has, the form changes for me, and then of course I guess the other side to answer your question is that I've been for many years now playing in my partner Julia's band and in her music and recording with her, so I think there's a natural influence that way. Working with her and as a singer and also a keyboard player like me, so but I don't think it was like an intentional direction. It sort of came out that way.
I've seen this described in terms of being like dream music too, right? And I've heard you refer to previous works in terms of having some kind of dream like quality to them. And there's sections during this record which, even before I read this, feel like the sensation of dreaming. Like Grand Trine gets me every time, because there's this section where the melody unspools and suddenly you're kind of cast out into this section which feels much looser, and then when the melody comes back you're like, where have I been? It's like that experience of someone calling your name when you're kind of lulled into a daydream and you're like, oh fuck, I was gone. Which is gorgeous. There's also Revealed Night, which I'm very curious about. Actually, I might as well ask about that here, if you wouldn't mind revealing. Revealed Night, initially, I felt like was a field recording of The Night. And then the more I kind of scrutinized it, the more surreal it kind of felt. There's a siren that actually maybe isn't a siren. There's maybe a traffic noise, which perhaps could be just noise, and everything started to feel very suspicious to me the more I listened to that piece. Could you tell me a bit about, this is a big question, apologies, but Revealed Night, but I'm curious as well about this potential dreamlike aspect within your work, and why that's appealing to you too.
Well, that's nice to hear in general about all the music and Revealed Night. Revealed Night. There is no field recording, but I've already seen people mention that, which is nice. I mean, the image I have, in this case, it's a visual image I had for Revealed Night, was this experience one has when you step out into the night and you look at the sky and the stars slowly come into focus as your eyes adjust to the dark. And also that, that kind of experience can happen in sound too, where you become aware of the sort of greater soundscape that you're in. But yeah, I mean, it's electronic, it's a synth and some acoustic instruments, and I was hoping to get that kind of uncanny, like, merging of sounds. I mean, that's happening, I think, across the album with this sort of mix of electronic sounds and acoustic sounds, and it was a big part of the mixing process for the album, is to kind of get them in this shared space. But I think, Reveal Night, it's nice to hear you focusing on a shorter, maybe a track that maybe would get kind of overlooked in favor of one of the songs with vocals that is more kind of prominent. But all of these, the little tracks like this, the shorter ones, they're equally important to me. And I think they're kind of doing the same thing in a way in different time scales. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
oh my god,
dreams, I don't know, I don't even know exactly where it started, but it has become like a theme for me, and it's like this world, this access we have to the great unknown, to me, like dreams and these other worlds, and we experience them all the time, and it feels very, for me at least, it feels very related to my experience in waking life too. I feel like just this sense of a kind of surreal quality to life, and I think it's always been important to me to not take for granted my experience and what I think I know. So I think dreams provide dreams, I guess maybe it's a bit of an analogy, but I do feel like in this album more so than anything else I've made, there is a kind of dream logic, and it's interesting how it translates to a waking experience, like just the surprising shifts that can happen in dreams, and how someone you are talking to a dream suddenly is a different person. And it makes sense in the dream. There's no, you don't question it. Like that kind of thing. You go along with it, and
Wow. Well, Tashi, I could ask about this record a lot. This is just the briefest skim, and I would really encourage people to check it out. It's gorgeous. I'll put a link in the show notes, so people, please dive in. By the time this podcast is out, the album will be out, so please do check it out. So, Tashi, let's go to your important records now. So, one question I like to ask at this point is about how you thought about the term important when picking your list of records. So, was there a way you understood important to come up with the list of records that you did?
Yes, I think the primary way I interpreted it was music that I have returned to, and has sort of stood the test of time in that way for me. And it's not always obvious to me what I return to. There are things that may drift off over time. But yeah, I think it's the selections I made they are music that has provided a lot of inspiration for me and continued inspiration over time. I think I listen to a fair amount of music in general, and all different kinds, not really genre specific. And it's interesting to me the things that stick around for years. It's a kind of natural selection process, and and then in this case, I tried to highlight maybe lesser known albums by the artists. In many cases, it's not just a single album that's important to me from an artist, and then I also tried to feature albums that feel relevant to my album, and not necessarily that I was listening to them a lot during the process, but they feel sort of like maybe I absorbed something at some point in time that kind of carried on into my own work.
Lovely. So let's go for the first of those records. I don't know if you had an order in mind or had one you wanted to go for first. If you could give me the name of the album and then a little bit about why it's important to you, that would be fab.
My first important album is duo. Well, it's not a really duo. Okay, it's an album by Annette Peacock and Paul Bley. It's got a kind of crazy title. Revenge, the bigger the love, the greater the hate. It's a live album. And the artist's name is Bley Peacock's Synthesizer Show. I don't know. I'm not really sure why how this all got, like, how the artist name became this. Maybe that's what they were performing under. But anyway, I mean, I think this duo of then partners, Paul Bley and Annette Peacock, is something I've been listening to for years. And I mean, I think I would say I focus more on Annette Peacock in this case, but just the energy in this music is so amazing to me. It feels so like it just explodes out of nowhere. And the playing is so amazing. I love how they treat Annette Peacock's voice, and all the processing is just so wild and like exciting to hear. It's like one of these albums I wish I could hear for the first time again. I'm very familiar with it now, but yeah, the version of "I'm the One" is just like, it just really gets me every time. But yeah, I guess there's a kind of a correlation that I work with my partner as well. We actually Julia and I did a duo tour where we were playing her music and she was playing grand piano and I was doing electronics, and she was also singing. But like the Annette Peacock, Paul Bley, like, collaboration was definitely like sort of in the back of my mind, how to like meld all these things together.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what do you think is, maybe this is obvious, maybe it's actually difficult to articulate, but what is particular, do you think, about that relationship as a duo when you are also, say, partners generally? I mean, how was that tour for you, doing the tour with Julia?
Yeah, in general, it's wonderful. It's not something it's developed organically over time. So it's not something that was like, we sat down and said, let's do this. It kind of happened, and it's taken different directions. I play in Julia's band, she plays in mine. And I think one thing specific to how it's developed for us, at least so far, is we've primarily been helping each other with each other's projects. So we haven't, that's generally how we work. And I think for me in general, that's like, it's nice that one person is taking the lead. It's, you know, so, and then the other person can, you know, support that. So that's how we've approached it a lot, for the most part, generally, so far. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll always be that way. But yeah, it's, you know, it's good. I mean, on a practical level, it's great just, you know, being a musician, which is a very specific lifestyle with where you travel and you have weird hours. And so, I mean, we understand what each other is doing, and it doesn't seem unsustainable, or I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, for sure, totally.
Even if it is.
But you can give each other that slack, I guess.
Yeah.
To be like, well, I, you know, I need this kind of space, so I understand you need this kind of space, or, you know, you're on this.
Yeah,
kind of
and in this past couple of years, I recorded my album first. Then we recorded Julia's album. Then Julia mixed her album. Then I mixed my album, and we're kind of in this funny parallel sequence. So it's good. We can really like. We know exactly what the other person is dealing with, because either she or I just dealt with that, or will be dealing with that, and it's nice. Now we can go tour and be in that mode together now, since it's all kind of in the same timeline.
Yes, yeah, you're aligned. Yeah, that's nice. With Revenge, the bigger the love, the greater the hate. It's very satisfying to say. You mentioned that you wish you could hear it for the first time. Do you remember how you heard it for the first time?
Oh, well, this is one of these albums that's kind of hard to track down a physical copy. I mean, it's gotta have been on YouTube or something, but I think, I mean, I was familiar with Annette Peacock's album, I'm the One. And it must have been through that, just like looking for more of her music. I'm a very big Annette Peacock fan, and yeah, I think I also love the studio recording of I'm the One, but the live version just has like a really incredible energy to me, and yeah, it's just so impressive the way they were doing that live. I can't imagine like the kind of the setup they had to do that.
Because this is 1971, isn't it? That it came out, but I think it was recorded in '69, which is unreal, given what they're doing.
Yeah.
Did you like it straight away? I guess again, it was probably on YouTube, as you say. You may not be able to remember, but the effects are, I imagine hearing this in the late 60s, the effects on Annette's voice are harsh, and the way that they're mixed as well, like they go for this very thick, chunky processing. It's kind of got almost these like bit crushed artifacts to it, which are sumptuous. I can imagine it being like quite I mean, it depends who's listening, right? Maybe if it was a particularly open-eared crowd, they wouldn't mind, but yeah, did it vibe with you right away?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time I came to appreciate the whole album, but I was familiar with a lot of the songs from the like studio recordings, and I think hearing them in this ruckus way was like really exciting. The way they kind of really dig into it, and yeah.
Tell me a bit about because I haven't heard the original, say like I'm the One. So how does it differ from the version that you hear on this live record?
Yeah. I mean, it's like I think it's kind of what you were saying that the effects are just really pushed in the live version. They're not so dialed in. So I think you just get that kind of rawness, which I don't know. I think in general, these days I love that quality in music, which maybe through all the recording software and things available now, you don't really necessarily get that rawness as much. Yeah, I think that also is the case with the second album I chose. Is also has this kind of raw quality that I really love. It just has a lot of energy.
Let's go to your second important album now then, Tashi. Which one did you want to go for next?
The second album is a live album of Alice Coltrane at the Berkeley Community Theater in 1972. This is a unofficial recording, but I also like with Annette Peacock. I spent a lot of time with Alice Coltrane's music and with her all the different eras of her music. I chose this album. I think what I find that I love her playing on this album, and she really digs in quite a lot and really gets like kind of gnarly with her playing. Yeah. And I think that was like, going back to the keyboard thing, hearing how she played, I'd say particularly during this period, it was inspiring to me, and kind of just like really letting go and letting things get kind of dense and swirling around, and then in general, it's such a cool band that she has with the Indian music players. So I think I hope it sees wider release someday. It's a really special recording. Interestingly, yeah, I didn't really thought, but both of these two albums are live.
Yeah, this one I think did get released in 2019, but I don't know how wide that distribution was.
Bootleg.
Oh, was it just as a bootleg? So it wasn't like
I have a copy, but that's not a licensed recording.
Oh, right. I wonder what the why it hasn't, like, I mean, it's the fidelity is pretty harsh, but in a way that as soon as I heard this album fire up, I was excited, because just the pressure the microphones are under in capturing this one there's such an energy to it. It's, a fidelity that feels very much tied to the vigor of the music rather than just, a muffled recording or something,
Yeah, I think also with this album, similarly, there's this like intense energy, which is like really exciting. And I also like, when I think about playing live, which is important to me, which is an important aspect, as much so as recording. I try to keep a sort of a little list of like just music that I feel like really, like, I guess in both of these cases with Annette Peacock and Alice Coltrane, like the recorded versions are quite different than what you hear in these live versions.
Yeah.
And I think that's like something I was striving for too.
As in to render like a very different live version to what's on the album?
Yeah, or like treating the band live in like a in a more open-ended way, and bringing the music to life that way.
So the track that you picked out for at least the inclusion of the music clip that I'm going to put in a bit, but I don't know whether it's your favorite generally, is, you know, Journey and Satchidananda, which is so different to the studio version, to the point where it feels like it's more of a translation of the energy of the original rather than anything specifically tonal, because it just spirals off almost immediately. It's wicked. I freaking love this version. So what made you pick out that track in particular as one that connects with you?
Well, it's the, I guess, two things. It's Alice Coltrane piece. The other ones are on the album are John Coltrane. But also I think it's one that people are familiar with, and so it highlights that aspect, the live aspect, and how wild it gets, and how they really push it. I guess it's funny also, I'm seeing now, without having given it much thought, that this is also, like with Alice and John Coltrane, there's also this sort of partner musician relationship.
Yeah. I think a big difference that I felt with this is so the drummer's Ben Riley, who is such a different drummer to Rashid and seems to give the whole thing a totally different form of movement. Like, I feel like Ben Riley kind of has more abrupt crashes. There's a kind of sense that it's almost bouncing off the walls in this version, where there's like a more of a kind of smooth smoke-like movement to the Rashid version in the studio, right?
Yeah, like a more overall like approach.
Oh, another thing I was going to say, a sort of observation that I kind of made when listening to your record and this one as well, is something really striking about Alice is that, I mean, you mentioned with your album having it all in your hands, and there is a real tactility to the way that you play that I think is also present in Alice too, where, you know, there's so much potential for synthesizers even back then as being something which kind of dislocates from the body as much as possible, and, you know, you use the keyboard to make sounds that sound completely out there and just sort of make you forget as a human instigator, whereas Alice was so rooted in playing stuff that felt like she was playing it. Like, there's so much kind of muscle and fiber and like dexterity to what she's doing, and I feel like your album also carries that quality too, of being a very tactile relationship with the keyboard. So I wonder whether that was a parallel that had ever kind of arisen to you, or whether that resonated at all.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the tactility of Alice Coltrane's playing is like, it's so visceral, and I'd say, like, for me, that is an important thing to try to reach for with playing synths. Having grown up playing piano, where it's so much about the touch, it's like everything is in the touch and that sensitivity, and then when you're switching to a keyboard that doesn't have that same kind of delicateness, finding ways to connect with the sound as when you're playing is important for me. Like, I think one way I have found to do this is I deal with different tunings, and that to me lends the sound a kind of identity. And then I have other little tricks, like, you know, things that allow me to kind of bend pitches that give it sort of its own kind of personal sort of touch. But yes, that's like, it is important to me, coming from a background in piano where came to really appreciate that sort of personal flair, which is, it's like translated through the fingertips and up through the arms and into the back. And it's, with, I think like the tuning is one way, and, maybe in that, in this case, Alice Coltrane is often playing an organ, which also has like, kind of somewhat reduced sensitivity. It's sort of like an on-off situation with the keys. Maybe that leads to some sort of extending into the techniques of playing. Like, she does these very cool bends, which in some ways, when you hear them, you're like, oh, that's Alice Coltrane. You can tell it's her, because she's like, no one does it quite that way.
Tashi, you've got one more important album. Again, if you'd like to give me the name of it and then a little bit about why it is important to you too.
The final album choice is Laurie Spiegel's Obsolete Systems. And I love Laurie Spiegel's music. I chose this album. There's just, I think, for a variety of reasons, there's specific tracks that I like from it, and are it's also slightly lesser known. And I think there's a lot of things I could say. I think one, I know it's a compilation, but there's something about, there's just all these different things she's trying that I really appreciate. And it kind of switches gears, the music, and I like that it feels very, her approach feels very open, and that she's experimenting, it feels like. Her approach to, electronic music in general, I think is really special. She wasn't afraid to kind of incorporate all kinds of other styles of music and influences into it, which I think is really, feels very human, I guess, her approach to electronic music. The track I selected is called 12 Voices Within, a Requiem, and it's like very dense and swirling, sweeping tones, and it's, for me, harmonically, it's so like cool, and it feels sort of endless, like you could just keep going further and further into it. It doesn't seem like it sort of ever makes itself clear what it is, which I love. I love that kind of ambiguity in harmony in general. So
yeah, and it's kind of at the other end of the spectrum in some respects to a lot of the work that she's best known for, which is these pointillistic, very clear, like tonally clear patterns, and then you have this, which is just like a smear of sound and protruding tones. And have you got a physical copy of this one? I seem to be getting the impression that, like a lot of Laurie's work, there's some wonderful liner notes going on with this.
Yes, I no, I do not have a physical copy of this. So all of my information is just coming from the air.
What is it about this record that you think maybe feeds into the way that you approach your music?
I think that what I mentioned earlier about this, I appreciate with Laurie Spiegel how she seemed to be experimenting all the time, and also not really tied to any, like, she didn't seem afraid to try melding different things together that you maybe would think like don't go together. I mean, that's something I appreciate in music in general, like music that doesn't really feel beholden to a style, that like or like a known style. I think like that's something I also appreciate about Arthur Russell in general, like his work. He was really just seemingly just did whatever felt good to him, and through that we have all this music that like there's nothing else like it, which I think is important. Like it leads to things that like no one else could do when it's coming from that place. And I think that's like for me with my music, I have no idea where I fit into the general landscape. And it's one of these things where it's like, it makes things tricky, but I wouldn't have it any other way. You know, it's like not knowing where you fit in. I guess a lot of people have this where they don't know how to describe they don't know how to categorize their own music. So it's not a unique thing, but I feel maybe that I lean into that. And I like as a musician in general to be trying new things, whether they or not they feel like I understand them right away, and to surprise myself. I think that's, that's oftentimes is like a driving force, is to like surprise myself and to see what's out there. And I don't think it's like putting on different costumes. It's not like just for its own sake. It's just continuing to push outwards, I guess.
What does that look like in practice? Perhaps it can't be distilled in this way, but it's interesting you mentioned actually, it's not like putting on costumes, whereas actually there's certainly a case for doing the same thing over and over again, being almost adopting a costume, just kind of, well, this fit yesterday, just habitually returning, right? But how do you go about stopping yourself getting, say, comfortable or, exploring and looking for those surprises?
I mean, for me, it feels like a personality thing. It's hard for me to speak for other people in this, like, or more generally, but I feel like that's my natural inclination is to be, you see things going in one direction and you kind of make a turn in the other direction. And that's like, I mean, I think there's something about it where it has to do with, it's related to how we hear sound and music in general. It's like for example, if you think of something like working with alternative tunings, I think what's interesting about them and why they can sound the way they sound is that we have so much music in equal temperament.
Yes. Yeah.
If and that's like maybe in part what's interesting about them is that they set things apart. They make you actually also aware of equal temperament, and that whole thing can flip where it's like you can have a lot of music in just intonation, and then it we become so saturated in it that it's like it stops having that that quality. And I think that's just generally something about how I think about sound and music in general. Is like how it works in contrast to itself. And I think that's maybe just like a sort of, I don't know if it's like a philosophy or as like a general like just kind of position I find myself in, but I'm not necessarily interested, when it comes to, like, say, tuning. It's just for a concrete example, I'm not necessarily interested in each of those individual intervals, or, the way they're tuned in and of themselves. I mean, I develop like personal, relationships with them with working with them over time. But I think it is a lot. It's what's interesting to me about them is how they function in the greater context, and hearing them in relation to other music that is not in that tuning system. And I think that, the reason the connection I'm making is that it's like, that's sort of in terms of making music and surprising myself in general. I don't feel like I have to be working in alternative tunings, only so far as they do that for me,
Yeah, for sure.
So that's, I think that's, anything, if you hear a lot of, as an example, a lot of drone music or something like that, what a breath of fresh air it is to hear something that is not drone music, right? It can be such a relief. It just feels so amazing. Or, something that's going either direction. You listen to something that's, anyway, yeah, I'm not going to keep going and start ragging on a bunch of different kinds of music. But the last point I wanted to make was that I, in terms of how I approach that, I think it's purely intuitively. I think with these things, it's not like looking outside all over the place for different things to incorporate into your music. It's really just you just have, for me at least, I just have to kind of reach inside and kind of let that be the guide. Mm-hmm. And that's how increasingly so I approach making music, or just do it. I don't really think too much about it. I look sort of internally. And of course I'm exposed to the world, so that, things are kind of filtering in all the time. But I don't really look as to the world as a guide for how to do this. Because I think that is how the most interesting, lasting, personal things are going to come about.
I was going to ask on that, actually, with the tunings, whether did you feel like you had to go through a stage of the kind of honeymoon period with the tuning, where, because your record feels like it wears these tunings very effortlessly. It's not like a demonstration of, a mean tone tuning. It's not that it just happens to be in that tuning either, but it's not like, oh wow, look at this new tuning I found. Do you feel like you have to kind of break through sort of acquaintance period so that you're just writing music rather than kind of dabbling with a newfound tuning, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I would say that I working with tuning for me was it's been a long time now, and it's evolved over the years for me. When I was initially getting acquainted and finding my footing, I think the music I was making wore it more on its sleeve. The way you're describing, it was more exploring that exploring that in the foreground. And now I'd say, yeah, it's definitely one of many aspects now, but I think also I've started to favor the tuning sort of being in the background, and it in the process of making this album, it was part of all of that playing that I was doing initially and messing around was becoming familiar with the tuning so that it like was felt like it was not on the surface anymore for me. And yeah, I like that quality, that it's there, but that somebody who's not familiar with any of the mechanics or any of that things can listen to it without just the initial reaction is, oh, that sounds weird, or that sounds out of tune, or
Right.
this kind of, which is like a lot of the music in alternative tunings. I mean, especially of the past, like because I feel like it was new and they were breaking ground. It's initially, it just announces itself as that this is a piece in an alternative tuning. And I think this kind of subtlety of it being there, but not necessarily drawing attention to itself is interesting for me. Like, I love that people would be listening to this kind of tuning without even being aware of it,
And maybe just getting like a sensation that something is somehow maybe fuller or augmented, but maybe not being able to put a finger on it.
Yes, definitely. Like it's, there's all these numbers and theories behind it, but in the end it's just sound. So I do feel like it should translate like that.
Yeah.
And it's in service of the music. It's part of it, but I don't think it's, for me now, it's like it's not the theme. I think what it does when I'm initially like exploring where I'm going with tuning, which often feels sort of like nomadic. I want it to, whatever tuning aspect, to kind of meld with the music and kind of become inseparable. So in the process of writing the music in that tuning, all of it's shaping the harmony. It's a good supporting character.
Tashi, I have one more question for you, which is about how you bring music into your life as a listener, like where you tend to buy music, where you tend to listen to music. You mentioned the fact that you listen to a lot of it, but where do you tend to buy music? What kind of formats, and where does your listening tend to take place?
Well, I'm a big music listener. I mean, maybe that's kind of obvious, but like I like to consume a lot of music. If that's not like the grotesque way of describing listening to music, but I thrive off of listening to a lot of music. Maybe a little bit less so recently. I have a child now, so there's not always the time to sit and listen. But I don't have any sort of allegiance to any format of music. I like them all. I listen to a lot of records, but I also like listen to music online. And listening, I mean, I don't know. I live in LA, so a lot of listening happens in the car. And actually, I find that to be a nice way to listen to music if it's suitable for driving, and a little bit of background noise. There's a nice headspace with driving for me where I feel like it's like I'm doing something else, but I can really listen.
Yes,
and that like is that sort of in between space is really kind of conducive for me to being absorbing different music. But I will really, like, if anyone mentions something to me, I'll check it out. I love hearing about music I'm not familiar with, whatever that is, any style. I'm always interested in hearing what I've not heard before. That's exciting to me.
Wicked. Tashi, this has been amazing. I've had a really special time with your new record, and these 3 records were awesome. As you say, you've highlighted 3 that I don't think necessarily come to the fore by themselves a lot of the time, even if the artist names maybe do. So I'm grateful to you for hauling these ones out of the internet and bringing them to my attention, and hopefully to listeners' attention as well. So thank you so much for all of that.
Thank you, Jack. It was really nice, and it was fun to dig into all of these ideas together.
Wicked. And to everyone listening, see you next time. Goodbye.